My name is Hannah Brooks, and I'm 35 years old. 4 nights ago, my mother called me for the first time in almost a year. Not to ask how I was doing. Not to check on her grandson she's never met. She called to tell me I needed to convince my husband to sell part of his farmland, $2.8 million worth, within 10 days, or she would lose everything. The same mother who told her friends I threw my future away. The same woman who refused to attend my wedding because she didn't want to sit in a barn surrounded by tractors. The same person who once looked my husband in the eye and asked him if he had considered getting a real job. And now, she needed us. Before I tell you what happened the night we walked into her charity gala, and what I said in front of everyone, take a second to like and subscribe to Women Reddit Stories, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories like this. And tell me where you're listening from. I always read the comments and love seeing how far these stories travel. Let me take you back to where this really began. 7 years ago, I was exactly the daughter my parents had always wanted. I had just graduated from NYU with a degree in finance. I was working as a junior associate at a respected firm in downtown Chicago. I wore tailored suits, carried a leather portfolio, and spent my evenings at networking events where everyone smiled too much and listened too little. My mother, Patricia Brooks, loved introducing me. "This is my daughter, Hannah," she'd say, her voice warm with pride. "She's going places. Executive track. Just wait." And I believed her. I thought my life was already mapped out: promotions, a luxury condo, a husband who wore cufflinks and talked about markets over dinner. Everything is clean, polished, predictable. Then I met Luke. It was early fall, just outside Madison, Wisconsin. I'd taken a weekend trip to get out of the city. Burnout had been creeping in quietly, and I needed space to breathe. Real air, not the recycled kind that came through office vents. I stopped at a roadside produce stand on my way back from a hiking trail. Nothing fancy, just wooden crates, handwritten signs, and the smell of fresh earth and apples. And there he was. Luke Carter stood behind the table, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with soil, explaining to an older couple why his strawberries tasted sweeter than anything they'd ever had. Not charming in the way I was used to, no rehearsed lines, no polished smile, but real. Completely, unapologetically real. When it was my turn, I picked up a basket of peaches. "These actually from here?" I asked, half joking. He smiled, not offended. "About 50 yards that way," he said, pointing past the trees. "Picked them yesterday." I don't know what it was exactly. Maybe the way he spoke, steady, grounded, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. Or maybe it was how, for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was performing. I came back the next weekend. And the one after that. 3 months later, I introduced him to my family. That night is burned into my memory. We had dinner at my parents' house in Evanston, white tablecloth, polished silverware, everything arranged like it always was when appearances mattered more than comfort. Luke wore a clean button-down shirt. I could tell he'd ironed it himself. The sleeves were just slightly uneven, and for some reason, that made me love him even more. My mother noticed it too, but not in the same way. She shook his hand, her smile polite but thin. "So, Luke," she said, settling into her chair, "what is it that you do?" "I run a farm," he said simply. "About 180 acres. Mostly organic produce and some livestock." There was a pause. Not a thoughtful one. The kind that fills a room when something doesn't meet expectations. "A farm," she repeated, like she was testing the word. My older brother, Daniel, let out a quiet laugh into his glass. Luke didn't react. He just sat there, calm, steady. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It's what I've always wanted to do." My mother leaned back slightly, studying him. "And that supports you comfortably?" I felt my stomach tighten. Luke smiled again, not defensive, not apologetic. "It does more than that. It gives me a life I'm proud of." No one responded. Dinner continued, but the tone had shifted. Subtle comments, quiet looks, conversations that excluded him without ever directly saying so. And when he stepped outside to take a phone call, my mother turned to me. "Hannah," she said, lowering her voice, "this isn't serious, is it?" I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "He's a farmer," she said, like that explained everything. "You worked too hard to end up like that." "Like what?" She sighed, as if I were being difficult. "Limited." That word stayed with me. Limited. I didn't argue that night. I didn't raise my voice or storm out. I just sat there, quietly realizing something I hadn't wanted to admit before. They didn't see him. Not really. And worse. They didn't see me anymore either. Because the version of me they loved only existed if I followed the path they had chosen. The next morning, I made a decision. I left my job 6 months later. Packed up my apartment, said goodbye to a life that had never really felt like mine, and moved out to Luke's farm in southern Wisconsin. My parents didn't come to the wedding. My brother sent a text that said, "Hope you don't regret this." And for a long time, they simply stopped calling. But Luke never asked me to prove anything. Never made me feel like I had given something up. We built something together instead. The farm wasn't perfect, the house creaked in the winter, the kitchen needed work, and the porch leaned slightly to the left like it had a secret it wasn't ready to share. But it was ours. Mornings started early. Coffee before sunrise. Long days in the fields. Learning things I had never imagined I'd care about: soil balance, irrigation timing, crop cycles. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing someone else's version of success. I was living on my own. What I didn't know back then was that one day, the same people who walked away from me would come back, not with apologies, not with understanding, but with expectations. And when they did, everything changed. 3 years after I moved to the farm, my life looked nothing like the one my parents had planned for me. And yet, it felt fuller than anything I'd ever known. By then, Luke and I had expanded the land. What started as 180 acres had grown to just over 260, piece by piece, through careful decisions and more than a few sleepless nights running numbers at the kitchen table. Our mornings began before sunrise. Coffee brewed strong, boots by the door, the kind of routine that didn't need to be spoken because it lived in your bones. I learned how to read the sky the way Luke did, how a certain shade of gray meant rain by afternoon, how the wind shifting slightly east could change everything. A year after I moved in, we got married. Not in a ballroom. Not in a country club. Right there on the farm. We set up rows of wooden chairs near the orchard. Luke built the arch himself, simple, sturdy, wrapped in white fabric and wildflowers that I picked the morning of the ceremony. Our guest list was small. Mostly neighbors, a few of Luke's longtime friends, and a local baker who insisted on making the cake as a gift. There were empty seats. Seats that had been meant for my parents. For my brother. They never came. My mother sent a short email the night before. "I hope you understand that we can't support this decision. This isn't the life we wanted for you." That was it. No "I love you." No congratulations. Just distance, dressed up as disappointment. I didn't cry that day. Not at the ceremony. Not during the vows. But later that night, after everyone had gone and the lanterns were burning low, I sat on the porch steps in my wedding dress, barefoot, staring out at the dark fields. Luke found me there. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "They'll come around," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No, they won't." He didn't argue. Instead, he took my hand and squeezed it once, firm, steady, like he was grounding me in something real. And in that moment, I realized something important. I hadn't lost everything. I had just stopped holding onto what was never truly mine to begin with. Life moved forward. 2 years later, our son, Caleb, was born. He came into the world on a warm June afternoon, loud and determined, like he already had opinions about everything. Luke cried when he held him for the first time, not dramatic, not loud, just quiet tears he didn't try to hide. I had never seen him like that. We named him after Luke's grandfather, a man who had started the farm with nothing but borrowed land and a stubborn belief that hard work could build something lasting. My parents didn't call. They didn't send a card. They didn't even acknowledge that their grandson existed. I told myself it didn't matter. Most days, I believed it. But every now and then, usually late at night, when the house was quiet and Caleb was finally asleep, I'd feel it. That small, sharp ache of something missing. Not approval. Just presence. Still, we built a life. By our 4th year, the farm had grown into something more than just crops and livestock. Luke had started experimenting with new agricultural systems, data-driven irrigation, soil monitoring technology, crop rotation models that adjusted based on real-time conditions. At first, I didn't think much of it. I knew he was smart, I saw it every day, but the way he worked, it didn't feel like someone trying to impress anyone. It felt like someone was solving problems because they couldn't ignore them. What I didn't fully understand yet was how far that would go. By year 5, we weren't just selling at local markets anymore. We had contracts with regional distributors. A few specialty grocery chains started carrying our produce. Chefs from Madison would drive out personally to select what they wanted. People respected Luke. Not because he demanded it. Because he earned it. And still, my family remained silent. No calls. No visits. Nothing. Until the night everything shifted. It was late October. The kind of night where the air turns sharp and you can smell winter coming before you see it. Caleb had just fallen asleep upstairs. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. And froze. Mom. I hadn't seen her name light up my phone in 11 months. For a second, I just stared at it. Then it buzzed again. And again. 3 missed calls in less than a minute. Something wasn't right. I wiped my hands quickly and answered. Hannah? Her voice came through, tight, strained, nothing like the controlled, polished tone I remembered. Yes. Mom? She exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding her breath. I need you to listen carefully. My stomach dropped. What's going on? It's Daniel, she said. He's in serious trouble. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge. What kind of trouble? A pause. Then. Financial. Of course it was. My brother had always been the golden child. MBA, corporate job, downtown condo, the kind of life my parents understood and approved of. What happened? I asked. He made some investments, she said, choosing her words carefully. Things didn't go as planned. How much? Silence. Then, quietly. 2.8 million. The number didn't even feel real. That's not possible, I said. How does someone even? He leveraged assets, she cut in. Including my home. I closed my eyes. You put your house up as collateral? He needed help, she said, her voice sharpening defensively. He had an opportunity. A very good one. And now? And now we have 10 days before everything is seized. There it was. The real reason for the call. I already knew what was coming before she said it. Hannah, we need your help. I didn't respond. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. What kind of help? Another pause. Then. You need to talk to your husband. I almost laughed. My husband? Yes, she said. We know about the land. The expansion. You have more than enough. Selling a portion would cover everything. There it was. Not a question. Not a request. An expectation. It's not that simple, I said slowly. It is that simple, she snapped. This is family. Family. The word landed hard. You didn't call when Caleb was born, I said quietly. She ignored that. This isn't the time to bring up old grievances. Old grievances. Like they were minor inconveniences. Like they hadn't shaped the last 7 years of my life. Mom. We're coming to Chicago this weekend, she continued, cutting me off. There's a charity event your father is attending. You and Luke need to be there. We'll discuss everything in person. Chicago. So that's how they wanted to do this. Public setting. Social pressure. Controlled environment. Just like always. I don't know if you'll be there, she said firmly. We're running out of time. And then she hung up. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, phone still in my hand, the sound of the disconnected line echoing in my ears. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps behind me. Luke. He'd been upstairs putting Caleb down. He stopped when he saw my face. What happened? I looked at him. Took a breath. My brother lost almost $3 million, I said. And my parents want us to fix it. Luke didn't react immediately. He just watched me, steady, focused. How? They want us to sell part of the land. That's when something shifted. Not anger. Not a shock. Something quieter. More controlled. And you? He asked. I swallowed. They've invited us to a charity event in Chicago this weekend, I said. They want to talk about it there. Luke nodded slowly, processing. Then he stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against the counter beside mine. Do you want to go? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. To shut the door, block the number, and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had sat on those porch steps years ago, still hoping for something different. I do, I said finally. Not for them. Not anymore. But because something about this didn't feel right. And I had a feeling. This wasn't just about bad investments. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because of the alarm, I'd forgotten to set it, but because my mind wouldn't let me rest. Luke was still asleep beside me, one arm stretched across the bed where I'd been. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier when something unresolved is sitting just beneath the surface. I slipped out of bed carefully and made my way downstairs. The kitchen still smelled faintly of last night's coffee. I poured myself a fresh cup, wrapped my hands around the mug, and stood by the window, staring out at the fields as the first light of morning crept over the horizon. 10 days. That's what my mother had said. 10 days before everything collapsed. It didn't add up. Not just the amount, though $2.8 million was staggering, but the urgency, the pressure, the way she had already decided what we were going to do. Something about it felt off. I set my coffee down and opened my laptop. If there was one thing my old life had taught me, it was this: numbers don't lie, but people do. And when something doesn't make sense, you dig. I started with Daniel. Typed his name into the search bar, adding keywords I knew would pull up anything remotely connected to his professional life. For a few seconds, nothing unusual came up. Standard profiles. Old conference mentions. A few business articles. Then I refined the search. Added investment, loss, lawsuit. And that's when it appeared. A short article from a financial news site, dated 4 months ago. Senior analyst Daniel Brooks resigns amid internal review. My stomach tightened. I clicked it. The article was vague, carefully worded, like most corporate statements are, but the message was clear. Daniel hadn't left voluntarily. He'd been pushed out. No direct accusations. No explicit details. But phrases like risk exposure concerns and unauthorized trading activity told me everything I needed to know. I leaned back slowly. 4 months ago. And no one had said a word. I kept digging. Forums. Financial threads. The kind of places where people say things they wouldn't attach their real names to. That's where it got worse. One post stood out. Anyone tracking Brooks' position on that AG Tech company? Heard he went all in on a short. Guy's either a genius or completely reckless. AG Tech. My chest tightened. I scrolled further. Another comment. Not genius. He's getting crushed. Stock's been climbing for months. Whoever runs that company just flipped the entire narrative. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. AG Tech company. Climbing stock. Something in the back of my mind started connecting pieces I hadn't fully looked at before. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Found a name I hadn't called in years. Megan Clark. We used to work together back in Chicago. She'd moved into compliance at a major firm, the kind of role where you hear things before they become public. I hit a call. It rang twice before she answered, her voice thick with sleep. Hannah. Do you know what time it is? I know, I'm sorry, I said quickly. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. There was a pause. Then a sigh. Okay, what's going on? Daniel Brooks, I said. You've heard anything about him recently? Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. That depends, she said carefully. Why are you asking? My grip tightened on the phone. Because he just lost almost $3 million, and I think there's more to it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then. Hannah, that situation is messy. My pulse quickened. How messy? Megan exhaled slowly. Your brother didn't just make bad investments, she said. He made a very specific one. A very aggressive short position. I closed my eyes. Against what? You're not going to like this. Just tell me. A sustainable agriculture tech company. Mid-sized at the time. Quiet growth, strong fundamentals. My heart started pounding. What's the company called? She hesitated. Then said it. Greenroot Analytics. Everything inside me went still. Greenroot. I'd heard that name before. Not in articles. Not in passing conversations. But late at night, sitting at our kitchen table, watching Luke review data on his laptop. Seeing documents with that exact name in the corner. I forced myself to speak. Anne. What happened to the company? Megan let out a short breath. It exploded, she said. Last year alone, its valuation jumped over 300%. Whoever bet against it got destroyed. My voice came out quieter than I expected. And Daniel went all in, she said. From what I've heard, he didn't just use his own money. He leveraged everything he could access. My mother's house. I swallowed hard. Why would he do that? I asked. Another pause. Then. Because it wasn't just about money. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? Megan hesitated again, like she was deciding how much to say. There were rumors, she said slowly. That he had some kind of personal angle. That he was convinced the company was going to fail, not just because of the numbers, but because of who was behind it. My chest tightened. Who? I don't know, she said. That part never got confirmed. But whoever it was, your brother took it personally. Personally. I thanked her, ended the call, and just stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing. Then, slowly, I turned. Luke was standing in the doorway. He must have come down while I was on the phone. He hadn't interrupted. Just listened. "You found something," he said. Not a question. I nodded. My throat felt tight. "Greenroot Analytics," I said. For the first time since I'd known him. Luke looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper. He stepped into the kitchen, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from me. There was no rush in his movements. No panic. Just quiet acceptance. "How much do you know?" he asked. "Enough," I said. "Daniel bet against that company." Luke nodded once. "Yes." The confirmation hit harder than I expected. "And you knew?" "I suspected," he said. "About 6 months ago. There were patterns in the market. Unusual pressure on certain positions." "And you didn't tell me?" He met my eyes. "I didn't want to put you in the middle of something that had nothing to do with you." I let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have. "It has everything to do with me," I said. "He used my family to fund it." Luke didn't argue. Because he knew I was right. I leaned forward slightly. "Greenroot, that's your company, isn't it?" A beat of silence. Then, "Yes." Even though part of me had already known, hearing it out loud changed something. Not because of the money, but because of everything it explained. All those nights he spent working quietly. The calls he stepped outside to take. The way he brushed off questions with a simple, "just some research." "How long?" I asked. "Before I met you," he said. "I started building it years ago. Small at first. Then it grew. And now?" He paused. "Now it's worth a lot more than your brother expected it to be." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the pieces finally fit. Daniel hadn't just made a reckless bet. He had targeted something. Someone. "You knew he was betting against you," I said. "Yes." "And you let it happen." Luke's expression didn't change. "What was I supposed to do?" he asked calmly. "Warn him? Tell him he was about to lose everything?" I didn't answer. Because I knew the truth. Daniel wouldn't have listened. He never had. "He made his own choices," Luke continued. "Just like we made ours." The room fell quiet again. But now, the silence felt different. Clearer. Sharper. I thought about my mother's call. The urgency. The demand. The way she had already decided we were responsible for fixing this. "They don't know, do they?" I said. Luke shook his head. "No." I looked down at my hands. Then back up at him. "They invited us to that event in Chicago," I said. "They want to talk about selling the land." Luke leaned back slightly, studying me. "And you?" This time, I didn't hesitate. "I want to go." Not because I was unsure. Not because I needed answers. But because now, I had them. And for the first time in 7 years. I wasn't walking into their world hoping to be accepted. I was walking in knowing exactly where I stood. And something told me. They had no idea what was coming. The drive to Chicago took just over 2 hours. We left early Saturday morning. Caleb stayed behind with Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor who had practically adopted him as her own grandson. She stood on the porch when we pulled out, waving with one hand and holding Caleb with the other while he called after us, "Bring me back a city toy." I smiled at that, but as the farm disappeared in the rearview mirror, my chest tightened. Because I knew, whatever happened in Chicago, things weren't coming back the same. Luke drove. One hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. He didn't talk much during the drive, but he didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was focused. Every so often, he'd glance at me. Not to check if I was okay, but like he was making sure I was ready. About halfway there, I finally broke the silence. "They're going to try to corner us," I said. Luke nodded slightly. "Probably. Public setting. Social pressure. They'll make it sound like we don't have a choice." Another nod. "And Daniel?" I asked. "Do you think he'll be there?" Luke thought for a moment. "If he is," he said, "it won't be to apologize." That sounded about right. We crossed into the city just before noon. Chicago looked exactly the same as I remembered: tall buildings, constant motion, people moving like they all had somewhere urgent to be. For a second, it felt like stepping back into a life I had already outgrown. But this time, I wasn't intimidated by it. I wasn't trying to fit into it. We checked into a small hotel downtown. Nothing flashy. Just clean, quiet, and close enough to the venue that we wouldn't have to deal with traffic later. The event was scheduled for 7 p.m. That left us a few hours. Luke dropped our bags near the bed and loosened his collar slightly. "You want to go over anything?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I already know what they're going to say." "And what are you going to say?" I met his eyes. "The truth." He held my gaze for a second, then nodded once. "Good." We spent the rest of the afternoon quietly. I took a shower, stood in front of the mirror longer than I expected, trying to decide what version of myself I was walking in there as. Not the daughter they remembered. Not the girl who used to wait for their approval. Something else. Something steadier. I chose a dark blue dress. Simple. Clean lines. Nothing that tried too hard, but nothing that shrank either. Luke wore a charcoal button-down and a blazer, not expensive, but sharp in a way that didn't rely on labels. By 6:30, we were on our way. The venue was exactly what I expected. A high-end hotel ballroom overlooking the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows, soft golden lighting, a string quartet playing near the far wall. People in tailored suits and evening gowns, moving through the space with practiced ease. The kind of place where appearances weren't just important. They were everything. As soon as we stepped inside, I felt it. The shift. Not because anyone said anything immediately, but because people noticed. A few glances. A few whispers. Some of them recognized me. Most of them didn't recognize Luke. And that was about to matter. My mother spotted us within seconds. Patricia Brooks stood near the center of the room, already surrounded by a small circle of people. She looked exactly the same, poised, controlled, dressed in a way that made sure no one questioned her status. Her smile appeared instantly when she saw me. But it didn't reach her eyes. "Hannah," she said as we approached. "You made it." She stepped forward, air-kissing my cheek without actually touching me. Then her gaze shifted to Luke. "And you brought him?" Luke extended his hand. "Luke Carter." She hesitated just long enough for it to be noticeable. Then shook it lightly. "Of course," she said. "Welcome." Not warm. Not genuine. Just polite enough to avoid attention. "Where's Daniel?" I asked. My mother's expression tightened slightly. "He'll be here," she said. "He's dealing with a few things." Of course he was. "And Dad?" I asked. "He's speaking with some donors," she said, already glancing past me like her attention was being pulled elsewhere. Then, lowering her voice just slightly. "We'll talk after the opening remarks," she said. "There's a private room reserved." There it was. Controlled setting. Planned conversation. I nodded. "Of course." She gave a small, satisfied smile, like things were already going according to plan, and turned back to her guests. Just like that. Dismissed. Luke and I moved toward the edge of the room. Same strategy, I said quietly. Looks like it, he replied. A waiter passed by with a tray of drinks. Luke picked up 2 glasses and handed one to me. Drink, he asked. I took it. Just to blend in. He gave a faint smile. We stood there for a while, observing. And that's when I noticed something else. People weren't just whispering. They were watching. Not openly. But enough to feel it. A man near the bar glanced at Luke, then at his phone, then back at Luke again, like he was trying to confirm something. A woman near the windows leaned toward her friend, murmuring something while subtly nodding in our direction. I frowned slightly. You seeing this? I asked. Luke didn't look. Yeah, he said calmly. You know why? He took a sip of his drink before answering. Probably. I studied him. You want to tell me? Not yet, he said. Let's see how this plays out. That answer didn't sit entirely right with me. But before I could press further, the lights dimmed slightly. The room quieted. My father stepped up onto the small stage near the front. Robert Brooks. Still composed. Still measured. Still the man who had always chosen silence over confrontation. Good evening, everyone, he began. His voice carried easily across the room. Thank you all for being here tonight. Your continued support means more than I can express. Polite applause followed. I watched him closely. There was something different. Subtle. But there. A tension behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. This event, he continued, is about community. About standing together in times of need. I felt Luke shift slightly beside me. Not surprised. Just aware. My father continued speaking, thanking donors, acknowledging partnerships, saying all the right things. But underneath it, there was something else. Something unspoken. And then, we all face challenges, he said. Unexpected ones. And in those moments, it's the people around us who define how we move forward. My grip tightened slightly around the glass. Because now, it wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't just a speech. This was a setup. A few minutes later, the applause returned. The music picked back up. And just like that, the room shifted again. My mother reappeared at my side almost instantly. It's time, she said quietly. No warmth. No small talk. Just direction. I glanced at Luke. He nodded once. We followed her. Through the crowd. Past the main ballroom. Down a quieter hallway lined with framed artwork and soft lighting. Until we reached a closed door at the end. My mother stopped, turning to face us. Inside, I knew exactly what was waiting. Daniel. My father. And a conversation they thought they controlled. She reached for the handle. Opened the door. And stepped aside. Let's talk, she said. I walked in. And immediately understood. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a trap. They just didn't realize yet. They weren't the ones holding it. The room was smaller than I expected. Not cramped, but intentionally private. A long polished table sat at the center, surrounded by 6 chairs. Floor-to-ceiling curtains blocked out the city lights, muting everything into a controlled, insulated space. And they were already there. My father stood near the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched like he didn't quite belong in his own setup. Daniel sat at the table. He looked different. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing obvious like disheveled clothes or visible panic. But something about him had shifted. The sharp confidence he used to carry, the effortless superiority, it was gone. In its place, tension. Tight jaw. restless fingers tapping against the table. He didn't stand when we entered. He didn't smile either. "Hannah," he said. Flat. Controlled. "Daniel," I replied. Luke stepped in beside me, calm as ever. My mother closed the door behind us with a soft click, the kind of sound that feels small but carries weight. "This won't take long," she said, moving toward the table. "We all understand the situation." I stayed where I was. "I'd actually like to hear it explained," I said. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "There's nothing complicated about it," he said. I made a position. "The market moved against me." "That's one way to put it," I replied. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp warning. "You don't understand the scale of this," he said. "These kinds of moves are calculated. High risk, high return." "Using Mom's house as collateral was part of that calculation?" I asked. A brief silence. My mother stepped in quickly. "Hannah, this isn't productive," she said. "We're here to find a solution." I looked at her. "Right," I said. "And the solution is us." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." At least she was honest about that. Luke hadn't said a word yet. He stood slightly behind me, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair, listening. Watching. My father cleared his throat. "We're under a time constraint," he said. "The bank has already issued a final notice." "How much exactly is owed?" I asked. Daniel answered this time. $2.8 million, he said. "Including penalties." "And if it's not paid?" "They seize everything tied to the loan," my father said quietly. "The house. Accounts. Assets." I nodded slowly. Then looked back at Daniel. "And the company you bet against?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. "Not relevant," he said. "It is to me." He leaned forward slightly, his tone sharpening. "You think this is some kind of game?" he asked. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I do." He laughed once, short, humorless. "No, you don't," he said. "You walked away from this world, remember? You chose dirt and crops over real opportunity." Luke shifted slightly beside me, but I lifted a hand just enough to signal I had this. "I also learned how investments work before I left," I said. "Which is why I'm curious, what made you so certain that company would fail?" Silence. Not long. But long enough. My mother stepped in again, more forcefully this time. "Hannah, enough," she said. "This isn't the time to interrogate Daniel." "When is the time?" I asked, turning to her. "After we sign something? After we give up part of our land?" Her expression tightened. "This isn't about you," she said. I almost smiled. "It became about me the moment you decided we were responsible for fixing it." Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, irritation rising. "You're overcomplicating this," he said. "You have land. Valuable land. Liquidating a portion solves everything." "Our land," I corrected. He waved a hand dismissively. "Same thing." "No," I said. "Not the same thing." The room shifted slightly. Subtle. But noticeable. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was controlling the pace. I took a step forward, closer to the table. "Let's be clear," I said. "You didn't just make a bad investment. You targeted something specific." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," I said evenly. "Greenroot Analytics." The name landed. Hard. My father's head lifted slightly. My mother froze for just a fraction of a second. But Daniel. Daniel went still. Completely still. And that told me everything. Where did you hear that? He asked. Does it matter? I said. It does when you're throwing around assumptions, he snapped. I'm not assuming anything, I replied. You took a short position against a company that's been growing steadily for over a year. You leveraged everything, including assets that weren't fully yours to risk, and now you're here asking us to clean it up. That's not. And from what I've seen, I continued, not raising my voice, not rushing, this wasn't just about numbers. You had a reason for choosing that company. Silence again. But this time, it was heavier. More exposed. My mother looked between us. Daniel, she said, uncertainty creeping in. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed locked on me. Then, slowly. You've been digging, he said. Yes. A faint, bitter smile appeared. Of course you have, he said. Still trying to prove something? No, I said. Just trying to understand why you thought betting against that company was a good idea. He leaned back again, but there was no confidence in it this time. Just strain. It should have failed, he said. The words slipped out before he could stop them. And the moment they did, the room changed. What do you mean? My father asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer right away. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. It wasn't supposed to work, he said. The data didn't support it. The scale didn't make sense. That's not what the market says, I replied. The market is wrong sometimes, he snapped. Or you were. His gaze snapped back to mine. This wasn't luck, I said. The company didn't just survive. It grew. Fast. My mother stepped closer to the table now, her composure starting to crack. Daniel, she said, more firmly. What exactly did you invest in? He hesitated. And that hesitation said more than any answer could. Finally. Agricultural tech, he said. Sustainability systems. Data-driven farming. I nodded slowly. And you thought it would fail? Yes. Why? He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then. Because I knew the type of person running it. My chest tightened slightly. There it was. The truth, sitting just beneath everything. And what type of person is that? I asked. He looked directly at me now. Not avoiding. Not deflecting. A farmer, he said. The word carried weight. Dismissal. Arrogance. The same tone I had heard years ago at that dinner table. And suddenly, everything connected. This wasn't just a financial mistake. This was personal. He hadn't just bet against a company. He had bet against someone he didn't respect. Someone he believed couldn't possibly succeed. Someone like... I didn't look at Luke. I didn't need to. Because I already knew what came next. And so did he. The only difference was, Daniel still thought he was explaining his logic. He had no idea. He had just exposed everything. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence in that room wasn't empty, it was full. Heavy with everything Daniel had just revealed, whether he meant to or not. A farmer, my father repeated quietly, like he was trying to make sense of it. Daniel didn't look at him. He wasn't supposed to win, he said again, more controlled now, like he was trying to rebuild the narrative he had just cracked. People like that don't build scalable companies. They don't understand markets. It was an obvious position. I let that settle. Then I spoke. So you bet everything, because you assumed someone like him couldn't succeed. Daniel's eyes snapped back to mine. I made a calculated decision, he said. No, I replied calmly. You made a biased one. His jaw tightened. That's easy for you to say now. It was easy for you to say before, I said. When you were calling it a little farm project. My mother's head turned sharply toward me. "What is she talking about?" she asked. I didn't answer her. Not yet. Instead, I looked at Daniel. "You didn't just bet against a company," I said. "You bet against an idea you didn't respect. And now you're asking us to pay for that." "I'm asking family to step up," he shot back. "Family?" I repeated. The word felt different now. Clearer. "You mean the same family that didn't come to my wedding?" I said. "The same family that hasn't met my son?" My mother flinched slightly. "Hannah, this isn't." "No," I said, still calm, still controlled. "Let's stay on topic. Because this is exactly the point." I took another step forward, closer to the table. "You want us to fix a problem that started with disrespect," I continued. "Not just for me, but for him." Now I turned slightly. Not fully. Just enough. "Luke." It was the first time I had said his name since we walked into that room. And it shifted everything. Because now. He stepped forward. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just present. My mother's eyes moved to him, then back to me, like she was trying to understand where this was going. Daniel watched him carefully now. Not dismissive anymore. Something else. Something more cautious. Luke rested his hand lightly on the back of the chair beside me. "You said you knew the type of person running that company," he said. His voice was quiet. But steady. Daniel frowned slightly. "I did my research," he said. Luke nodded once. "I'm sure you did." There was no sarcasm in it. Which somehow made it worse. My father straightened slightly near the window. "What company are we talking about?" he asked. I reached into my bag. Pulled out my phone. Opened the article I had saved the night before. Then I placed it gently on the table and slid it toward them. "Take a look," I said. My mother was the first to reach for it. Her fingers trembled slightly, just enough to notice. She read silently at first. Then her eyes slowed. Focused. Her posture shifted. "What is this?" she asked. "Keep reading," I said. My father stepped closer, looking over her shoulder. Daniel didn't move at first. But then, slowly, he stood up. Walked around the table. And looked. The room went quiet again. But this time. It wasn't tension. It was realization beginning to take shape. "The founder," my father said slowly. My mother's lips parted slightly. Daniel leaned in closer. And then. He saw it. The photo. Luke. Not in boots. Not in the fields. But standing in a greenhouse, clean, composed, the kind of image that fits perfectly into the world Daniel had always believed he understood. For a second. He didn't react. Then his expression cracked. "That's," he started. He looked up. At Luke. Then back at the phone. Then at Luke again. "No," he said. It wasn't denial. It was disbelief. Luke didn't move. Didn't defend. Didn't explain. "I'm a farmer," he said simply. "I'm also an engineer." The words landed clean. No extra weight. No need for it. My mother took a step back. "This doesn't make sense," she said. You never asked," I said gently. My father rubbed a hand over his face, processing. "Greenroot Analytics," he murmured. "That's your company?" Luke nodded once. Daniel let out a short, sharp breath. "That's not possible," he said. You run a farm." "I do," Luke said. "And a company valued at over $40 million, I added. That was the moment it fully broke. Daniel stepped back like the room had shifted under him. He said, his voice tightening. "You knew." Luke met his gaze. Yes. And you let me make your own decisions? Luke said calmly. Yes. That's insane, Daniel snapped. You could have said something. Would you have listened? Luke asked. Silence. Because they all knew the answer. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. This was supposed to fail, he said again, but the certainty was gone. The projections didn't. The projections didn't account for reality, Luke said. They accounted for your assumptions. That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. My mother looked between them, her composure unraveling piece by piece. So, this entire time, she said, her voice quieter now, almost fragile. You were successful? I almost smiled. Not out of satisfaction. But because of how small the word sounded compared to everything they had missed. He built something real, I said. While you were busy deciding it wasn't worth seeing. My father exhaled slowly. And for the first time. He looked at Luke differently. Not dismissively. Not cautiously. But, honestly. I owe you an apology, he said. Luke shook his head slightly. You don't owe me anything, he said. I never needed approval. That landed in a different way. Quieter. But deeper. Daniel stopped pacing. Turned back toward us. So what now? He asked, his voice sharper again, but less certain. You going to stand there and pretend this changes anything? We still need the money. There it was. Back to the real reason we were here. I stepped forward again. This changes everything, I said. My mother looked at me. Hope. Desperation. Something close to it. Hannah, she said softly. I held her gaze. And for the first time. I didn't feel small. Didn't feel like I was asking to be understood. I was deciding. You asked us to sell our land, I said. Yes, she said quickly. Just a portion. No, I said, calm but firm. The word landed like a door closing. We're not selling anything. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. My mother blinked. I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly, I said. That land isn't just property. It's our home. It's our future. And it's not something we're giving up to fix a mistake we didn't make. Daniel scoffed. So that's it, he said. You're just going to let everything fall apart? I looked at him. Really looked at him. And this time, I didn't see someone powerful. I saw someone who had run out of control. No, I said. And that one word shifted everything again. Because now, they were listening. Not expecting. Not assuming. Listening. And they still didn't know. What came next would matter even more than the refusal. The room stayed quiet after that. Not the tense kind of silence we'd had before, this one felt different. Like everything had finally been laid out, and now there was nowhere left to hide. My mother was the first to speak. What do you mean, no? She asked, her voice softer now, but still holding on to control like it was the only thing keeping her steady. I mean, we're not selling our land, I said. Not a portion. Not an acre. Nothing. Her expression tightened again, but it wasn't the same sharp authority from earlier. It was something more fragile. But you can help, she said. You just said. I said this changes everything, I replied. And it does. I stepped closer to the table, resting my hands lightly against the edge. You're asking us to give up something we built over years, I continued. For a problem that came from a decision we had no part in. Daniel let out a frustrated breath. So what, you're just going to lecture us and walk away, he said. I didn't react to the tone. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about deciding. No, I said again. We're not walking away. That caught them off guard. All three of them. My father straightened slightly. My mother blinked. Even Daniel paused. Luke shifted beside me, not surprised, just watching, letting me lead. I turned slightly toward him for a brief second, and he gave me a small nod. That was enough. We're willing to help, I said. Hope flared instantly across my mother's face. I knew you would, she said quickly. I told your father. But not the way you want, I added. That stopped her. Completely. What does that mean? She asked. Luke stepped forward then. Not taking over. Just standing beside me. Your house is at risk because of the loan structure, he said calmly. The immediate issue isn't the full amount. It's the missed payments and penalties triggering foreclosure. My father nodded slowly. That's correct. We can cover that, Luke said. Silence. Then. What? My mother asked. Enough to stabilize the situation, he continued. Give you time to restructure, sell assets properly, or negotiate terms without losing everything immediately. Hope returned. Stronger this time. Real. You would do that, she asked. Yes, Luke said. Then he paused. And the air shifted again. But there are conditions. Daniel let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Of course there are. Luke didn't react to that. Instead, he looked directly at my parents. First, he said, this isn't a gift. It's a loan. Fully documented. Legally binding. Every dollar repaid with interest over a fixed timeline. My father nodded again, more firmly this time. That's reasonable. Daniel didn't say anything. He just stared at the table. Second, Luke continued, Daniel doesn't touch any financial decision involving this family again. Not investments. Not accounts. Nothing. Daniel's head snapped up. You don't get to decide that, he said. Luke met his gaze. I just did. The calm in his voice made it land harder than if he'd raised it. This is my money, Luke added. My terms. My mother hesitated. Daniel, she started. But my father spoke first. He's right. That surprised all of us. Including Daniel. You've done enough, my father said quietly. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue. But for the first time. He didn't. Luke continued. Third, he said, this doesn't happen again. No more calls asking for money. No more expectations. This is a one-time solution. My mother's lips pressed together. But we're family, she said, softer now. Luke didn't look away. And this is the boundary. The word hung there. Clear. Final. I watched my mother carefully. This was the moment. Not about money. Not about pride. About whether she understood anything that had just happened. Her eyes moved between us. Between me and Luke. Between what she wanted, and what was actually being offered. Finally. She sat down. Slowly. Like something inside her had given way. I never thought, she started, then stopped. Tried again. I thought I was protecting you, she said, looking at me now. Pushing you toward something better. I held her gaze. You were pushing me toward something that looked better to you, I said gently. Not something that was better for me. That landed. Not harsh. But honest. My father exhaled, long and tired. We made mistakes, he said. A lot of them. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. And strangely, it was enough. Daniel finally spoke again. Quieter this time. So that's it, he said. I just step aside. I looked at him. Really looked at him. You don't step aside, I said. You take responsibility. He didn't respond. But he didn't argue either. And that said more than anything. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was settled. My mother looked at Luke. Then at me. And for the first time in years, there was no judgment in her expression. Just something uncertain. Something real. We'll accept the terms, my father said. My mother didn't object. Daniel didn't speak. And just like that, it was done. We left the room a few minutes later. The hallway felt quieter than before. Or maybe it was just me. Like something I'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. We didn't go back into the ballroom. We didn't need to. Instead, Luke and I walked out of the hotel together and into the cool night air. The city lights stretched out in front of us, bright and constant. But for once, I didn't feel pulled toward them. I felt grounded. Luke reached for my hand as we walked. You okay? He asked. I smiled. Yeah, I said. I am. And I meant it. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. My mother hadn't suddenly become someone else. Daniel still had a long way to go. But something had changed. Not them. Me. A week later, things started settling into place. The legal paperwork was drawn up exactly as Luke had outlined it. My father handled most of it, carefully this time, asking questions, double-checking details. Daniel stayed out of it. For once. My mother didn't call to argue. She didn't call at all. But she didn't demand anything either. And somehow, that silence felt different. Not empty. Just quieter. More honest. Back on the farm, life didn't pause. It never does. Caleb ran through the fields like nothing had happened, chasing after chickens, asking questions about everything, laughing in that way only kids can. Luke went back to work like he always did, steady, focused, never needing recognition for any of it. And me? I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun drop behind the trees, the sky turning that soft golden color that always made everything feel a little more still. 7 years ago, I thought I was losing my family. But what I was really losing was the version of myself that needed their approval to feel whole. You thinking about them again? Luke asked, stepping out onto the porch. A little, I admitted. He sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. You regret anything? He asked. I looked out at the land. At everything we had built. At everything we had protected. No, I said. And that answer came easily. Because it was true. I didn't regret choosing a life that was real. I didn't regret choosing someone who built something instead of just talking about it. And I definitely didn't regret setting a boundary that should have been there from the beginning. Good, Luke said quietly. We sat there for a while, just watching the light fade. No pressure. No expectations. Just peace. And for the first time in a long time. That was enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing your ground, I'd love to hear your experience. Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Women Reddit Stories for more.